Welcome to part 3 in the wood burning fire versus electricity video series. And in this one, we're going to dive right into the resin pour after you prepare your wood. Now when you're dealing with smaller pieces like this, you're always going to want to use a tape to help overflow, make sure it doesn't leak out from the top. In this case, I'm using the seaming tape just to cover around the edges and underneath the bottom in case there is a spillage. You see there that it's not very tacky, it's definitely more of a plastic material, but it turned out that this was better than some of the other tapes that I've used in the past, so I would highly recommend this one specifically. And make sure you wrap the board very tightly. You don't want any of the resin to spill out. Now I find it very beneficial when I'm wrapping those pieces of wood to put them on something. In this case, I'm just going to grab 2 small cans of stain so I can turn it over and access the back side or the underside much easier. While it's levitated like this, I'm able to make sure that the entire seam is as tight as possible. In this case, I'm actually going to add another layer of tape here because I don't feel like the seam is as strong as I want it to be, and you definitely do not want any resin to get through here because it will lock your board down to your workspace. Now after you have your board wrapped up, you want to make sure that it's level for the pour. You don't want it to be off sides in any way. Now in my experience, I've done enough of these to know how much resin I'm going to need to fill this one. And on this specific one, we're going to use about 8 ounces. And when I say that, understand that it's not the board you're looking at right here. It'll be one of the larger boards. This board itself will take about 4 ounces to fill. Now after I grab my cool little popsicle stick here, I'm going to apply some of this resin pigment. This one here is a copper. And if you've watched any other videos with this kind of pigment, you'll know that a little bit goes a long way. And on this one, I wanted to try to make it as bright as possible, which is why I added a little bit more than I would normally. And here I am remembering that this is the color I want to use on the larger board, not the thinner board. So let me go ahead and grab that one real quick and I'll bring it back over here. And whenever you're using resin, make sure that you mix it thoroughly. Using a popsicle stick like this, I would say you want to mix it at least 2 to 4 minutes. And there's a couple different techniques for how you pour the resin in and where you do it. I like to fill in the deepest sections possible first. I find that the thinnest section just turns out a lot better when you start it this way. And after this initial pour, you're going to want to work it into the crevices there. I'm using a small plastic putty knife. In the past I've used larger ones, both metal and plastic. Plastic overall seems to spread it a lot better than the metal without scarring up the wood. And I've also used one of those window squeegees. It doesn't matter which one you use really, they all come out about the same. And drips are normal, just go ahead and clean them up because you don't want to deal with the dried resin and sanding it down afterwards if you can avoid it. Now the next step is popping all those bubbles. I didn't have my torch on me. at this time, so I had to use a heat gun, which is fine for a thin layer like this, but if you are doing a deep pour, I highly recommend a torch only, as the heat gun will move the liquid resin around and maybe give you a finished product that you're not looking for. Now this is easily my favorite black resin ever. Just a couple of drops will make a gallon look pitch black. It's amazing. Just like before, you're going to want to pop all the bubbles out and then let it sit to dry overnight. And when you return the next day, you should have this very hard plastic. It should not be flexible at all. You want to make sure that it is solid all the way around before you start taking the tape off. Once that's finished, you're going to want to throw this through a planer if you have one. If you don't worry about it. You can start with a 60 grit sandpaper and it will do the trick. It's just not nearly as efficient or quick as a planer is. Now if you do have a planer and you're doing this for all the boards here, I recommend that you drop it down by about 1/4 of a spin every single time you put the wood through the planer. And you're going to want to make sure that the very last time you put it through the planer, all the pieces of wood are exactly the same height. Now I went ahead and cut out some of the footage here because I wanted to save you guys some time, and you'll see at this very next segment when the black resin wood piece is going through. I want you to pay attention to these little white flakes. That's actually the resin is being chipped off by the planer. And again, you're going to want to make sure that your very last pieces are at the exact same height. You can see there that a lot more of these white flakes came off, which means a lot more of the resin is coming off. When you are done and they're all the same height, it should look similar to this. And right now I'm just feeling in between where the cracks are. There is some gaps there, so I'm going to fill them in with some wood putty, and then after that dries, I'm going to go ahead and sand it down. And I'm doing that so that the entire surface is absolutely level. And now the fun part, after that has dried, you're gonna sand everything down. I always start with a grit 60 when I'm on these projects. Now I'm hitting the excess wood glue here, and that's gonna take a little bit longer, so please stick with me here. And now you're gonna see me transition to a left to right motion here, because I want the entire top to be level, like I said before. Now this is very hard to do with an orbital sander like you see there. I highly recommend a belt sander if you can get one. It makes things a lot easier, it's a lot more level. I've just had enough time and practice that I can do this straight. Now make sure you get all the dust off between the sanding, because you don't want the little grains of dust to get trapped in the resin and make it look disheveled. Now I have a small little shop back here that works perfectly for me, but if you don't have one, that's fine. Grab a brush, grab a paper towel, whatever you need to do to remove the excess dust. And when you transition to a higher grade grit, you may want to think about what sander you're using here. I am using a different one than you saw before. This is a less powerful one, but it works perfectly when it comes to more of the finishing techniques that I need to do. And after you got a nice even coat done at the 60 grit, go ahead and bump it up to a higher grit. I like to go to 100 after 60, and then I'll go to 150, 220, 320, and finally 400. Now at this point, I've gone through all of my regular grits and it's time to transition to the 400 grit. And this one's different than the rest because it's a mesh as opposed to the regular sanding disc. But before you sand with the 400, you're going to want to wet the wood nice and thoroughly, like I do right here. And there's a couple different reasons for this, but the main reason is that the wet wood lets the grain rise up so that you have a smoother finish when you are sanding it. And if you look here, I'm taking it very nice and easy, small circles with this 400 grit, and I'm not going this fast. This is just ×2, just for your benefit. But I'm going to finish the entire table like this. Once that's done, I want you to see what comes off of this with just a few wipes. Look at that. And just like before, you're going to want to clean this between every sanding. I usually do the 400 wet sanding at least twice. So with that, I'm leaving you. Enjoy your new table.